Sometimes history moves slowly. Other times, it takes 13 minutes. On March 1st, 1974, Judge John Sirica entered the courtroom in Washington, D.C. The foreman of the Watergate jury carried a large, old-fashioned black briefcase, the sort with accordion folds at the bottom and a carrying handle at the top. And inside was one indictment and one sealed report. One of Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski's deputies handed over a second briefcase. It was locked and overstuffed, according to the account in the New York Times. And the whole thing took some 13 minutes. Inside the second briefcase were transcripts of testimony, subpoenaed documents, White House tapes, and other items of grand jury evidence, along with what is now known as the roadmap. And the House Judiciary Committee was considering impeaching Richard Nixon. They wanted what was in that briefcase. They wanted that grand jury material. Sounds a little familiar. And I could tell you, a month later, March 18th, 1974, all that material went to the House, the grand jury stuff, because this third branch of government, the judiciary, was backing up another branch of government, the Congress, in its co-equal authority of considering impeachment. Specifically, the judge ordering the materials to go to the House, which means that order has the force of law. The judge ruling that based on the contents, there was really no question regarding their materiality to the House Judiciary Committee's investigation. The echoes today are in these new filings that we've been reporting on. Congress invoking one of its strongest authorities in separation of powers, a check on a potentially criminal executive to pry loose the, yes, grand jury material from the Mueller report. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy. The so-called roadmap that was stuffed inside that briefcase and presented to Judge Sirica in '74, it actually took 44 years before it was ever unsealed, and only after a SWAT team of legal analysts went to the court to get it. Fun fact, the federal judge who ordered that roadmap to be unsealed, Judge Barry Howell, is the same federal judge who the House Judiciary Committee appealed to today in this newfound quest to get grand jury material from the Mueller case. So there are some notable similarities here as well as some differences. And here to help us understand them is a member of the SWAT team that got that Watergate roadmap ultimately unsealed. I'm joined by Lawfare Editor-in-Chief Ben Wittes, as well as Joy Vance, former U.S. Attorney. Good to see you both.
Good to see you.
Hey, Ari.
Hey there. So, Ben, let's start with you. You were responsible for getting that roadmap unsealed for the public. Now, it didn't take 4 decades for Judge Sirica to turn over the grand jury evidence. So walk us through how you see all this.
Right. So as you said in your introduction, there's some substantial similarities. There are also some important differences between this situation and the unsealing of the roadmap. So the biggest difference is that in the case of the original roadmap, it was the prosecutor that wanted to turn it over to the Congress and to the House Judiciary Committee. And the House Judiciary Committee said, sure, give it to us. It's relevant to our impeachment inquiry. Here, you have a slightly different situation where the prosecutor wanted to give them everything except the stuff they wanted to redact. And they have the Justice Department has no particular interest in turning over the sealed grand jury material in here. And so I don't think you would have, in this situation, the Justice Department would really resist the production of that material, I think in all likelihood, that the committee is asking for. On the other hand, as you point out, there are some real similarities here. And one of them got more similar today when the House Judiciary Committee and House leadership said, hey, I know we haven't called this an impeachment inquiry, but it kind of is an impeachment investigation. And that actually has legal significance because the reason the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals allowed that transmission in 1974 was that there was an impeachment inquiry going on. And so by situating the current request as part of an impeachment investigation, the Democratic leadership makes it more similar to the proceeding that took place in Judge Sirica's courtroom.
Right. I mean, this is a clearly strong precedent to supersize the request that Congress already can make. Joyce, the other part of this that is different is you can make a broad argument that this time around they got the roadmap. The Mueller report is the roadmap. It's hundreds of pages. And while Mueller spoke very carefully, as he warned he would, he told everyone he was going to be a hostile witness. That's why there was a subpoena. We have reason to believe that his prosecutors and the experts who helped write that report saw it as a roadmap because several sections made the case that the evidence showed the president committed crimes in office. To use the language of the Mueller report, as you know, Joyce, substantial evidence in 5 or more cases of obstruction. So is it better to have a roadmap without the grand jury material if Congress wants to do something about it?
You know, it's better to have both, and I think Congress is now entitled to have both. What we're talking about here is the grand jury material that was redacted in the Mueller report. Prosecutors call that 6E for shorthand. That's the rule that governs disclosure of grand jury material. And that rule says that it can be released either preliminary to or in connection with a judicial proceeding. And impeachment is a judicial proceeding. So today, the Judiciary Committee has clarified that they're involved in a process that's preliminary to that judicial proceeding. And I think that they're entitled to get the material. It's also important for them to get it. This is not just grand jury material. It can be documents and other materials connection pursuant to grand jury subpoenas. Without having seen that and been behind the veil of all of those redacted comments in the Mueller report, we don't know how valuable that is, but Congress is entitled to find out, and I expect that a court will order this on an expedited basis.
And Joyce, do you think there's grand jury material that could change anything fundamental? I mean, I was sitting in the back of that Mueller hearing room on Wednesday, and one of the reasons that I think so many people said, well, is that it? Is that all? Was that everyone basically stuck to their points. We saw some Democrats, as I mentioned at the top of the show, move towards impeachment. But in that room, you had a lot of Democrats who were already basically for impeaching this president, including Mr. Nadler. We know that from his House vote last week. You had Republicans who were critical. You had Mueller holding the line. Is there something in the grand jury material that moves things, do you think?
You know, I suspect that there's some good information there. A lot of people kept saying in advance of the Mueller hearing that they were looking for the movie version of the report. And it's clear that Mueller doesn't win any Academy Awards for Best Dramatic Actor. But what happens here is the report is maybe a sleeper documentary in that Academy Awards hunt. And the grand jury material, prosecutors don't go into grand jury with a witness unless there's something important that they need to pin down, something important that they want to preserve. So not getting that full flavor means Congress may be lacking some of the best evidence, the most sensitive information. If I were in Congress, I'd be demanding this material, too. I expect it'll be productive.
We're almost out of time, but Ben, to Joyce's point, rarely do you see great method actors appearing under subpoena. I mean, there were a lot of clues that Mr. Mueller was not going to give much of what some were hoping for.
There sure were. So anybody who expected Bob Mueller to be charismatic and narrative and really sort of tell the story in a capacious fashion has no experience with Bob Mueller. That is not who he is. And to the extent that we kind of conditioned our expectations of what FBI director testimony sounds like based on these sort of dramatic testimonies by Jim Comey, we were, not considering who Bob Mueller really is. That said, he, clearly there's a lot of, if you take the time to listen to extended passages of it, the Democrats on that committee, both of those committees, did a relatively good job, in my opinion, of drawing out in these extended segments, important factual information in that report. And I do think that exercise was valuable. For people who really want the full extended dance version, dramatic of the report, we have a podcast called The Report that's been trying to do exactly that.
Ben Wittes, going right into the podcast plug. Rachel's a big podcast person, so I think you did that on the right show.
She was very good to us last week.
So you're right in the right spot, and I know, as you mentioned, it's The Report if people want to check that out. Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and professor at University of Alabama Law School. Appreciate both of your expertise tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We have a lot more to get to, and that breaking news out of the Supreme Court, which is next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.